Akavir proved alien beyond expectation, and the Commission believes any future attempt to invade Akavir should not be contemplated without much greater knowledge of the conditions, politics, and peoples of that continent. The Commission unanimously concludes that given what we know now, any attempt to invade Akavir is folly, at least in the present state of the Empire. The Empire's legions are needed at home. One day, a peaceful, united Empire will return to Akavir and exact severe retribution for the disaster at Ionath and for our fallen Emperor, but that day is not now, nor in the foreseeable future. Hindsight is 2020, and despite a severe lack of information returning from Uriel Septim V's invasion of Akavir, the Empire now explicitly understands what Akavir means to the race of men. It means death, for Akavir is the land of beasts, not men. No men or mer live in Akavir, though men once did. These men, however, were eaten long ago by the vampiric serpent folk of Saisi. Had they not been eaten, these men would have eventually migrated to Tamriel. Uriel Septim V was a gallant emperor. He rose to power in a time when the Cyrodiilic Empire's power was wavering. He restored some hope in the populace that the mighty heartland of Tamriel could once again return to prosperity. How could he achieve such a feat when his predecessors failed? He sought to return the focus of the Empire away from internal strife to seek strength on foreign shores. He started by conquering Roskria, the island settlement north of Skyrim, somewhere in the Sea of Ghosts, and then he set his sights on a greater prize, a formidable continent which had wreaked havoc in Tamriel twice in the past: Akavir. On the long voyage east, Uriel and his expeditionary force captured the islands of Cathnaquay, Ezrinet, and Neslia. But these were relatively small feats, like slaying the flies on the back of the great beast. Akavir was not so willing to cave under the weight of the Western Empire of men. What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? It's Michael here, and welcome to Fudge Muppet. As much as I'd love to delve into the mysterious tale of Tamriel's first and only invasion of Akavir, what we're here to discuss is the possible fallout of this seemingly disastrous conquest. I'll give a brief explanation of the events that transpired, even though we only have the reports of a few scouts to draw from, but if you'd like to hear the full story of the invasion, we have a video on the channel that I highly recommend watching first. You can find The Invasion of Akavir, narrated by Scott, linked in the description below, and once you've finished watching that, you can come back to this one. So from the few historical accounts that have survived to the present day, it seemed almost certain that Uriel Septim V lost his life along with his grip on Akavir, but a recent interview with the man, the meme, the legend, Todd Howard, might have just shone a new light on this story, potentially revealing a huge plot point that may be included in Elder Scrolls 6. Perhaps the scout reports were wrong, maybe some misinformation was documented, the truth skewed by the tumultuous final days of war and death that marked the alleged end of Uriel's life. So after Uriel Septim V and his expeditionary force conquered the islands between Tamriel and Akavir, the Empire had the necessary marshalling points and supply routes to facilitate the invasion of the Dragonland. The invasion began well, and the Imperial forces colonized two cities, one dubbed Septimia, the other Ionath. In capturing both cities, the Empire received no resistance from the natives. Ionath was the largest city and was more tactically situated, so it soon became the Emperor's headquarters. The Empire sent envoys to try to contact the Saisi king, but the Akaviri snake men remained silent, and none of the messengers returned. This was clearly not what the Imperials had anticipated. It was as if their invasion was being scene-zoned by the Saisi snake men. The absence of locals in the captured cities meant the colonizing Imperials had to tend to the land. If they could not cultivate crops, it would only be a matter of time before the supply lines ran dry. To make matters worse, the Saisi were raiding territory occupied by the Empire. The harsh Akaviri winter made life a frozen hell for the men. Eventually, envoys claiming to be in possession of a peace offering from the Saisi king arrived at Ionath. This proved to be a treacherous ploy, as the envoys murdered the city guards at one of the gates and opened the doors to a strong party of their comrades. The goal was likely to assassinate Uriel Septim V, but the troopers of the 10th tasked with protecting the Emperor's palace proved their courage and put a stop to it. The summer meant the end of the blizzards and the biting cold, but it introduced a new problem. The hot, dry winds parched the land, and the imperial crops failed. The river that had been useful for transportation had dried up by sun's height. Some scholars speculate that these unbearably harsh seasons were not natural and were instead conjured up by powerful Psyche sorceries, but the truth of this cannot be known without more information which simply did not return to the shores of Tamriel. The conditions were just as cruel at sea, and the Imperial fleet had been ravaged. In fact, the fleet shrunk in size so greatly that the hope of a full retreat became near impossible. The fleet left Akavir with the intention of returning with supplies and reinforcements, but they would never return. With most of the battle mages on board, communication with the Emperor and his men was all but severed. After a successful ambush on the Psyche army gathering in the mountains, Uriel and his expeditionary force were eventually driven in retreat to Ionath, where they were soon besieged. The fleet had successfully made it back to the conquered island of Ezrionet. However, any hopes of relieving the besieged Imperials on Akavir was destroyed by a series of savage storms which did not subside for the rest of the year. In Lord Patrede's report, we can discover how the final days of the invasion panned out. The Council's last contact with the Empire was in early Frostfall. By Evening Star, the Council was extremely worried about the situation in Akavir and ordered the fleet to sail regardless of the risk. Despite the continued storms, the fleet managed to press on to Akavir. Hope was raised when contact was made with the Emperor's battle mage, who reported that Ionath still held out. Plans were quickly laid for the expeditionary force to break out of Ionath and fall back on Septimia, where the fleet would meet them. This was the last direct contact with the expeditionary force. The fleet arrived in Septimia to find its garrison under savage assault from a large Psyche army. The battle mages with the fleet threw back the enemy long enough for the survivors to embark and the fleet to withdraw. The few survivors of the expeditionary force who reached Septimia told how the Empire had led the army of Ionath by night 2 days earlier, successfully breaking through the enemy lines, but then being surrounded by overwhelming forces on the road to Septimia. They told of a heroic last stand by the Empire in the 10th Legion, which allowed a remnant of the 14th to reach Septimia. 2 survivors of the 10th arrived in Septimia that night, having slipped through the enemy lines during their undisciplined victory celebration. These men confirmed having seen the Emperor die cut down by enemy arrows as he rallied the 10th's shield wall. We can gather from this report that the details of the chaotic final days are hazy at best. Contact with the Emperor's battle mages was cut off before the execution of the final retreat, so the climax to this story comes from 2 survivors, and we would have no reason not to believe their accounts until now. And these developments do not come from some old unearthed tome in the Imperial Library. No, they come from a higher power, Todd Howard himself, and I can't think of a more reliable narrator than the proven truth teller Todd. In a recent interview with the guys over at the unofficial Elder Scrolls pages, the subject of Akavir came up. This was an interview from PAX East back in late March this year. Todd is asked, "What are some of your opinions on fan theories out there?" And he replies with, "I think that they're all good. Like I said, people want to know truth, but even my perspective is one version of truth of what happened in the history of Elder Scrolls and so forth. I would temper their desire to have all mysteries revealed, because mysteries are good for a fantasy world to have. What is beyond the ocean? Would you do a game in Akavir? These are things we have thought about. I could sit here and tell you lots about Akavir. Actually, one of the original Skyrim designs had, I think it was Uriel V returning, with his army of dragons from there to retake his throne." By the sounds of this response, this was more than just a quick plot idea thrown out there by Todd. He says it was one of the original Skyrim designs, and it pretty much confirms that the accounts of these 2 survivors cannot be taken as gospel. The last stand happened at night after all, and the Emperor could certainly have survived an arrow or 2. Or what if the Psyche had wiped out the last of the Imperial forces, only to use their powerful sorceries to keep the Emperor alive? The Psyche who invaded Tamriel in the First Era bent their knee before Riemann Cyrodiil. Maybe they did so again Uriel of the Septim bloodline, the bloodline of the Dragonborn. Maybe the Psyche had no interest in Uriel Septim V. He could have still survived. That's the thing, we know so little about Akavir and the outcome of the failed invasion that the possibilities are nearly endless. If he still lives, Uriel will have long exceeded the normal human lifespan, but there are a great deal of unnatural occurrences reported to have happened on the continent of Akavir, and the Psyche Sicii are often described as being vampiric, so maybe it would be their doing. We know that Akavir is the land of dragons, but one of the few sources we have on the land claims that the dragons are all dead. The book Mysterious Akavir says, after the serpent folk ate all the men, they tried to eat all the dragons. They managed to enslave the red dragons, but the black ones had fled to Potun. A great war was raged, which left both the cats and the snakes weak, and the dragons all dead. It would make sense for the Sicii snake folk to have wiped out the dragons. After all, the Sicii who became the Blades on Tamriel were named the Dragon Guard because they were supposedly renowned dragon slayers. But once again, we can't say for sure that there were no dragons for Uriel to recruit. In fact, it is said that one particular ruler from Akavir learned to transform himself into a dragon. This leader is named Tosh Raka, and he rules the Kapotun Catmen. Their empire is also named Kapotun, which translates to the Tiger Dragon's Empire. Tosh Raka is rumored to be a divine being who was the first of his race to succeed at becoming a dragon. Under their Tiger Dragon Emperor, the Kapotun soon became a powerful empire, contending with the supremacy of the Sicii. If the Sicii had not played a part in Uriel Septim V's survival at the Battle of Ionith, and if he'd survived his wounds alone, the Cyrodiilic Emperor would have all of the justification he needs to support the rivals of the Snake Men. What if Uriel Septim V joined the Kapotun? What if he learned to utilize his dragon blood, becoming a dragon like Tosh Raka? Uriel Septim V, the rightful heir to the Empire of Cyrodiil, could very well cross the stormy seas from Akavir, invading Tamriel and challenging the current empire, trying to depose the false line of Mede emperors during the events of the Elder Scrolls 6. We know that the empire is weak, and we know that the Thalmor are edging closer and closer to becoming the most powerful political force on Tamriel, but the return of a Septim Emperor could turn their plans to ashes beneath a blazing barrage of dragon fire. And even if you can't come up with a lore-friendly way to keep the Emperor alive, an Akaviri invasion is still possible. The races of Akavir haven't invaded Tamriel since the 572nd year of the Second Era, centuries prior to Uriel's invasion. Maybe the Sicii want their revenge. And what about the Kapotun? If they're growing powerful enough to rival the supremacy of the Snakes, they could find their ambitions spreading beyond the horizon. Mysterious Akavir says, Tosh Raka is the largest dragon in the world, orange and black, and he has many new ideas. First, Tosh Raka says, is that we kill all the vampire snakes. Then the Tiger Dragon Emperor wants to invade Tamriel. Crossing the vast seas is no problem for dragons, and Tamriel is ripe for the taking. Todd Howard has said many times now that the Elder Scrolls 6 is going to be huge and ambitious, so I think it's possible that a lost Septim and his army of dragons could be a part of Bethesda's plans, especially when you consider the attitude of E3 this year. Dragons were a focus in the Elsewhere expansion for Elder Scrolls Online, and dragons have been added to Elder Scrolls Blades, and it seems that obviously after the success of having dragons in Skyrim, there's this whole add dragons meme going on, so perhaps their fetish for dragons will continue into Elder Scrolls 6, brought to you, or to Tamriel I should say, by the mysterious continent of Akavir. It all sounds a bit crazy, I know, but Todd Howard was the one considering this as a possibility for the story of Skyrim, and that's what gives it credence. So what do you think? Akavir is a mysterious place. Little is known of the continent, and because of this, just about anything is possible. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the idea down in the comments. While you're down there, have a look in the description for links to our social media accounts and our video on the failed invasion of Akavir. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I've been Michael, and I look forward to nerding out with you again very soon.